Hello, my name is Katrin Lacarte. I'm a nurse, author and photo artist, and I'm the creator of the project, the UV disinfection robot, and he will become your best friend at your home. From why we need an effective cleaning and this disinfection robot, it's not far to how to protect your health. You'll get fundamental knowledge about how is our situation on the world today. Is it scary when they cut over 17 million minks in Denmark? Why do we have to protect our health? Why our pets? Here is the knowledge about the danger. Let's now see about bacteria and viruses.
The anthrax virus can attack the lungs.
The white powder may have contained anthrax virus, and the authorities have...
The virus responsible for the disease. Not virus. Bacterium. For everyday folks, the term virus usually means an invisibly small whatever that's responsible for the zombie apocalypse, but can at least make you sick. As such, it's synonymous with bacteria, but easier to pronounce, thus making word repetition avoidable in the evening news. In reality, however, they are very different. Yes, both of them could ruin your Sunday with coughing, explosive diarrhea, and profuse blood vomiting, but they substantially differ from each other in size, structure, and biology. Bacteria are cellular creatures of microscopic size. Most of their bodies consists of the cytoplasm, a gooey organic substance in which a bunch of biochemical processes take place. These processes together form the actual life of the bacterium, and they are regulated by the genetic material sloshing about in the cytoplasm, known as DNA or the curse filter. To keep the cytoplasm from flowing everywhere, it is surrounded by the membrane, and here we have a functioning bacterium which feeds from its surroundings, and as it becomes fat enough, it divides. Viruses are way more simple. They are dwarfs compared to bacteria, with their tiny shells only surrounding their genetic material, which can either be DNA or acid. Oh, goddammit. Without cytoplasm, viruses are like Anton Chekhov tragedies. Nothing happens in them. There are no biochemical reactions, no life processes. The virus doesn't do anything, it just is. Like people on reality shows. But if it doesn't do anything, how does it reproduce? A virus can be regarded as a message in a bottle. Whenever it comes across a susceptible cell of a higher organism, it gets picked up and the cell will read its genetic material.
May the devil's ass f*** you in the ears. Pass it on.
Based on the information in the virus's genetic material, the biochemical processes of the cell will start replicating the virus, which usually does not result in a happy ending for the cell. The main difference between the two pathogens is that bacteria are alive, they have their own metabolism, they feed, they reproduce. It's a miracle they don't have to pay taxes, while viruses don't, strictly speaking, live. They are just packaged codes waiting for a host cell to replicate them. Viruses, therefore, rely upon invading other organisms to survive. Some attack people, others prey on animals or plants. Even bacteria aren't safe from them. In the meantime, bacteria can peacefully exist in the soil, in natural waters, in the drain, or in leftover hot dogs without causing any trouble. You even carry them on your skin and in your guts, and no harm is done to you. On the contrary, every fart that ever cracked you up was a product of bacteria. Of course, plenty of them cause diseases, but we can't lump them together with viruses because their biological differences affect our means of combating them. As long as they are outside the body, rules of general hygiene apply, the intensity of which is dependent on the specific pathogen. Sometimes it's enough to wash hands, other times we hysterically splatter bleach all over the place. Pathogens that have already entered the body have to be treated differently because you can't just pour acid over them or tickle them with flames. Unless you want to kill the patient as well, you have to target the pathogens specifically. In the case of bacteria, this can be achieved with antibiotics. Antibiotics wreck the special biochemical processes of bacteria, making them die miserably while apologizing. The biochemical processes of the cells of the patient are different enough from those of the bacteria for antibiotics not to affect them much. We can't pull the same trick on viruses because, if you recall, there are no biochemical processes in viruses. If you've ever tried parachuting with an anvil, you have an idea of just how effective antibiotics against viruses are. The biochemical processes of viruses are performed by the host cells during their everyday activity, so we cannot block them without seriously damaging the host and triggering malpractice lawsuits. However, there are antiviral drugs which can block special elements of the host-virus interaction, elements that don't exist during normal cellular functioning and therefore will not be missed, such as the act of viral entry into the cell. Antiviral drugs are not good against all viruses, and even in cases when they are not as effective as antibiotics against bacteria. But do not despair, there is another weapon against viruses, namely the unstoppable power of love, vaccines. They are not for curing viral diseases though, but for preventing them. Of course, many bacterial infections can be fought with vaccines as well, but generally speaking, vaccines are used more often against viruses because, as a rule of thumb, the more simple a pathogen structure is, the better vaccines work against it. And viruses are simple. On the particle accelerator Hodor complexity scale used by scientists, viruses are pretty close to the latter, way closer than bacteria. There are of course plenty of exceptions to this rule, so the golden age of viruslessness has not yet begun, but is this really our biggest problem when socks with flip-flops is still a thing? Summing it up, viruses and bacteria, although both potential pathogens, differ greatly in their structure and their biology, calling for different methods of combating them. Antibiotics left over from treating grandpa's pus-oozing tooth are not going to work on your flu.
Couldn't we try it anyway, just a little?
No. Mixing them up in a conversation is not a deadly sin, but it is ill-advised if you work in the media, as it could lead to television sets getting damaged. Health.
How to protect ourselves against bacteria and viruses. How to protect our cats, our dogs. And who is thinking about their parents, their grandparents? We want to feel safe when we are at home, in any situation, whether we put our clothes on or make yoga exercises on the floor. But can we avoid viruses and bacteria? Where do they come from? Let's now see about this.
Stated Clearly is funded by our viewers on patreon.com/Stated Clearly. Stated Clearly presents Where do new viruses come from? If you've been watching the news, you've probably heard of the novel or new coronavirus, which, starting in late 2019, began making people ill in China. International air travel has since allowed it to spread person to person to new countries, as governments began to issue travel restrictions and even quarantines. Speculations about the origin of the virus began to spread online. Some claim that the virus might be a genetically modified weapon, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This claim currently seems highly unlikely. Others suggest that the virus may be an escaped lab specimen. Now, this actually is possible. Viruses have escaped from research labs in the past, but as of the time that I'm recording this voiceover, investigations into this idea have not yet reached any solid conclusions. Could there be another, more natural explanation for the origin of this virus? The answer is yes. COVID-19, the new human-infecting coronavirus, may have simply evolved from an older animal-infecting coronavirus. To understand how this may have happened, let's first take a look at viruses in general. What are viruses? Of the many things that can make you sick by infecting and reproducing inside you, viruses are among the smallest. If we resize this drawing to a more realistic scale, you see that hundreds of viruses can fit inside a single bacterial cell. That's how tiny they are. Thousands of different viral species have been studied and described by scientists so far. Millions more likely exist. They come in many forms, but all species consist of a small collection of genes, stretches of either DNA or RNA that carry information for making more copies of the virus, and those genes are enclosed in a protective coating of protein and sometimes a lipid membrane. All known viruses are parasitic, but most are not parasitic to humans. Instead, some only target plant cells, others only infect bacteria, and so on. A virus reproduces by getting its genes into a living cell. Different viruses do this in different ways, but once inside, the cell acts as if the viral genes are its own genes. It begins reading them and building copies of the virus instead of performing its normal tasks. Coronaviruses are a huge family of virus species that infect animal cells. Some infect chickens, others infect pigs, some infect humans, but most of them are extremely mild. They simply give you the common cold. Corona means crown and refers to the unusually large crown-like spikes sticking out of their membranes. These protein spikes are selectively sticky, sort of like Velcro. They don't attach to most objects but are extremely sticky when they bump into specific molecules found on the outsides of animal cells. Once held firmly in place, the coronavirus waits until swallowed by the cell. It then begins to reproduce at the cell's expense. Different animal species have different types of molecules on the outsides of their cells. Because of this, bird-infecting coronaviruses usually can't infect humans. Their Velcro doesn't hold strong enough to our cells. Unfortunately, the natural process of evolution can sometimes help a virus overcome this problem. When virus genes are being copied during reproduction, mutations can occur. These are either due to simple copying errors or processes called reassortment and recombination. These happen when two or more viruses infect a single cell. In most cases, mutations that change the shape of viral spikes render the virus useless. Their Velcro no longer sticks to any host cells. On rare occasions, however, a chance mutation will just happen to allow a virus to attach to a new host species. If the modified virus is then lucky enough to encounter that new host species, infection can occur. We call this a spillover infection. The virus has spilled over into a new type of host. Early on, during a spillover event, the virus usually isn't very good at infecting its new host. Its Velcro is not a perfect match, and many other challenges might slow the virus down. Oftentimes, the mutations that let it infect the new host also make it worse at infecting its original host. Because of this, many spillover viruses go extinct after infecting just one or two people. They're usually dead ends. That said, if the virus can survive and reproduce just long enough, natural selection will promote any new mutations that help it better spread and reproduce in the new host population. Positive mutations accumulate over multiple generations, negative mutations are discarded until, bam, a new epidemic is being screamed about on the news. Though it may seem to us that these new viruses just sort of pop into existence overnight, scientists now know there is a long, slow burn before each explosion. Genetic evidence tells us that slowly evolving spillovers have been the cause of almost every major outbreak known in history. In the early 2000s, a coronavirus that used to only infect bats appears to have spilled over into civets. There, it mutated even further and spilled over into humans. We called it the SARS virus because it causes severe acute respiratory syndrome. It spread internationally from person to person, and several scientists were infected in the lab. By the time the virus was contained, over 8,000 people had been infected, over 700 died. A coronavirus from camels also recently spilled over to humans, causing even more deaths. Coronaviruses are not the only types of animal viruses that can adapt to new hosts. HIV spilled over from chimps, most likely when someone cut themselves while preparing chimp meat for dinner. The swine flu came partly from pigs, but we think it actually evolved through a recombination with a pig virus and a bird virus. The 1918 Spanish flu, the big one that devastated populations all around the world, may have spilled over from chickens. While the evidence is not yet conclusive, the new coronavirus might just be one more example of normal evolution. A very similar virus has been found in bats, and another was recently discovered in pangolins. These animals are endangered, they're protected, but they're often used illegally for food, rituals, and alternative medicine in the region where COVID-19 first broke out. Now, there are serious people checking to make sure that the virus did not come from a lab, either by accident or on purpose. After all, the technology to genetically modify viruses really does exist, but it's important to understand that the normal process of descent with modification, acted upon by natural selection, really does produce new viruses. It happens naturally. The chance of a virus evolving to successfully infect a new species is extremely low, but there are over 7.5 billion people on this planet. Most of us interact with animals on a daily basis. We keep them as pets. We eat them as food. This means that, as unlikely as spillover infections might be, there are billions of opportunities for one to take hold every single day. Add this to the fact that the entire world is now connected through international flights, and you realize that what happens in Vegas doesn't actually stay in Vegas, at least not the way that it used to. Luckily, we have international groups like the World Health Organization and various centers for disease control to help contain outbreaks when they happen. With international cooperation, we have prevented many catastrophes in the past, and we will prevent many more in the future, so long as our species continues to work together. So, in summary, where do new viruses come from? In most cases, new viruses evolve from old viruses. Stopping the spread of new viruses requires international cooperation. For up-to-date, accurate information on the risks, visit the World Health Organization website at who.int. I am John Perry, and that is the novel coronavirus, stated clearly.
So how to protect our health for bacteria and viruses? What about the treatments for bacteria and virus diseases, like vaccinations for viruses and antibiotica for bacteria infections? But that doesn't sound like the perfect solution when you see the challenges with mutating viruses and problems with bacteria which become antibiotic resistant. Have a look at this situation and its challenges.
Antibiotic resistance is a global concern. More bacteria are becoming resistant to multiple antibiotics. Common infections such as of the gut, urinary, and respiratory tract are becoming difficult or sometimes impossible to treat. Infection with resistant bacteria may lead to prolonged recovery, increased length of hospital stay, more deaths, higher cost of treatment, and greater spread of infection and resistance. The problem is that no new class of antibiotics has been developed since the 1980s, and the health community is worried that the antibacterial drug pipeline is near empty, and the achieved gains of modern medicine are at brink. For example, treatment options such as cancer chemotherapy, organ transplantation, and post-surgery outcomes would fail or have turned into high-risk procedures because of failing antibiotics. In the US, an estimated 2 million people are infected with antibiotic-resistant bacteria every year, leading to about 21,000 deaths annually. Imagine the scale of damage in India, where infections are common, waste management is poor, and antibiotics are used indiscriminately. WHO says a post-antibiotic era is a real possibility for the 21st century. And most of this is happening because of overuse and misuse of antibiotics in humans and animals. So how do bacteria become resistant to antibiotics? The resistance can be both natural and acquired. Some bacteria are naturally resistant to certain types of antibiotics. while immunity towards antibiotics can also be acquired through genetic mutation and horizontal gene transfer. Genetic mutation is a spontaneous change in the DNA of the bacteria, which helps it overcome the mitigating effect of the antibiotic. However, a common way in which bacteria acquires resistance is through the transfer of resistant genes to another one in its proximity. This is horizontal gene transfer. Use of antibiotics in humans and animals puts selective pressure, a process where non-resistant bacteria slowly die off, leaving only the resistant bacteria to flourish, identical to the theory of survival of the fittest. And there are numerous pathways for these to reach human beings. Let us look at the poultry industry to see how humans are exposed to these antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Poultry farmers feed low dosages of antibiotics to chicken throughout their growth cycle. Therefore, the gut of a chicken is not just a reservoir of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, but also of unused antibiotics. Humans are exposed to both of these through the meat that we eat and the feces and farm waste that are released into the environment. There is another category of people, like the meat handlers and cooks, who are susceptible to such exposures. This continuous interplay between antibiotics and bacteria in food, soil, water, and sewage leads to more resistance buildup, much like a chain reaction. And this chain reaction is happening every second, and more bacteria are becoming resistant. At this rate, antibiotic resistance is expected to become the biggest nightmare for healthcare providers in the 21st century.
So this was a fundamental knowledge about why we shall protect our health, although we have treatments like vaccination and with antibiotica. Please remember to like, subscribe and make a comment, and look at the next video for how we can protect our health.